The wind in Wyoming doesn't just blow, it claws. It comes down from the foothills with teeth, rattling the bones of your house and tearing at the fences you spend your life mending. I'm Ethan Cole, and this land is all I have left. This patch of dirt and sorrow has been my world for 10 years, ever since I buried my wife, Anna, and our newborn daughter under the big oak by the creek. That morning, the wind was meaner than usual. The sky was a bruised purple and the clouds were churning. I was out checking the north fence line, same as always. The wire was loose again, but as I crouched down, my gloved hand gripping the splintered wood, I saw them. Tracks. Not coyote tracks, not a stray calf. These were small, barefoot, pressed deep into the half-frozen mud. They were a child's tracks. My breath hitched in my throat. I hadn't let myself think about children in a decade. I'd built walls around my heart as high as the Teton Mountains, but these little footprints, they just walked right through. I stood up straight, my hand going to the revolver on my hip. Not to draw it, just for the feel of the cold steel. This land gets drifters, dangerous men. But this wasn't a man. I followed the tracks with my eyes, my gaze catching on a small shape huddled against a fence post further down the line. It was curled up like a wounded animal, trying to steal a little warmth from the wood. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her feet were black with mud, and her thin cotton dress was ripped to shreds. Tangled, sun-bleached hair covered her face like a curtain. I took a slow step forward, the ground crunching under my boots. She must have heard me, because her head lifted slowly. And that's when I saw her eyes. Hazel eyes. But they weren't a child's eyes. They were old and tired, and full of a caution that could stop a man in his tracks. She was a wild thing, cornered and deciding if I was a threat. We just stared at each other for a long moment, the wind howling between us. "You lost?" I finally asked. My voice was rough, rusty from disuse. She didn't answer right away. She just shook her head, a tiny, slow movement. "What's your name?" I tried again. She hesitated, her pale lips barely moving. "Maggie," she whispered, the name almost stolen by the wind. "Where's your family, Maggie?" I asked, though I already felt a cold dread creeping into my chest. A flicker of something dark passed over her face. Pain. "Don't have one," she said, her voice flat. "Not anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, to tell her to move on. I had enough ghosts haunting this ranch. I didn't need to take on hers. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. The brutal honesty in her voice held me there. "You've been out here all night?" She just shrugged, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. "Since yesterday. I saw your horses from the hill. I didn't touch anything, I swear." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a desperate need to be believed. My own rules, the ones I'd lived by for 10 silent years, were screaming at me. Don't get involved. Don't let anyone in. But looking at this half-frozen child, I found myself asking a question that would change everything. "Are you hungry?" She bit her lip, like she was weighing the cost of admitting it. Then she gave a small, sharp nod. A little. This was wrong. This was dangerous. My days were a routine of cattle, fences, and silence. Predictable, safe. Bringing this girl into my home would shatter that peace. It would let the world back in. And then she spoke again, her voice cutting through my thoughts like a razor. She stood up, her thin fingers gripping the fence wire. "Sir," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, Would you pretend to be my papa, just for one day?" I stared at her, certain I'd heard wrong. The wind must have been playing tricks on my ears. "What did you say?" She swallowed hard, but her gaze didn't waver. "There's a lady, Clara Renner. She's from the orphanage in Cheyenne, and she's looking for me. If she finds me, she'll send me back to Mr. Boone's farm." The name Boone came out like a curse, and her voice trembled with a terror that was real and raw. "I can't go back there," I can't. But if she thinks I already have a family, if she thinks you're my papa, maybe she'll just leave me be." The request was so insane, so desperate, it knocked the air out of my lungs. I hadn't been a father in a decade. The word felt like a stranger in my own mind. I opened my mouth to say no, to tell her it was impossible. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do anything. Just say I belong here. Just for today." I looked at her, really looked at her, the pride in the way she held her small shoulders even while begging, the trembling in her hands that she refused to let go of the fence. I thought of the little bonnet my Anna had stitched, the one with the tiny blue flowers tucked away in a trunk by my bed. I thought of the crushing silence of this house. "One day," she said again, her voice barely audible, "that's all. I could send her away, ride into town, find this Clara Renner, and wash my hands of the whole thing. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing." But looking into those ancient, pleading eyes, safe had never felt so much like a betrayal. My hand, which had been resting on my gun, moved to the fence post, my fingers tightening around the rough wood. "You better come inside," I said, my voice low and steady. Maggie blinked, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Really?" "One day," I repeated, the words feeling heavy and real on my tongue. "After that, we'll figure something else out." A small smile broke through the dirt and grime on her face. It was a fragile thing, but it was brighter than any sunrise I'd seen in 10 years. "Thank you, sir." "Ethan," I corrected her. "Ethan Cole." "Thank you, Mr. Cole." I unlatched the gate. She stepped onto my land, onto my life with hesitant bare feet. As she walked past me, I caught the scent of old smoke and road dust clinging to her clothes, a testament to how far she'd run. My old hound, Ranger, trotted up, sniffing her hand curiously. He wagged his tail. For the first time in a very, very long time, the silence of my ranch didn't feel like grief. It felt like the calm before a storm. It felt like hope. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. I pushed open the heavy cabin door, the hinges groaning like an old man complaining. Maggie stepped inside, her bare feet hesitating on the rough, cold floorboards. The place was neat, but it was the neatness of a museum. Everything in its place, but no life in it. Just dust motes dancing in the gray light, smelling of cold ash and pine. "Sit," I grunted, pointing to a chair by the kitchen table. She perched on the very edge, her hands folded in her lap like she was afraid of taking up too much space. I poured her a cup of water from the pitcher and set it in front of her with a thick slice of yesterday's bread. She ate it slowly, her eyes tracking my every move. She was still a wild thing, just brought indoors. "You look half-starved," I muttered, more to myself than to her. I pulled down the heavy iron skillet and slapped it on the stove, dropping in thick strips of bacon. The sizzle and the smell filled the room, and I heard her stomach rumble, loud in the quiet cabin. She looked away, a flush of shame on her dirty cheeks. When the bacon and eggs were done, I slid the plate in front of her. "Eat." She ate with a strange kind of precision, taking small, careful bites. She wiped her mouth on the frayed edge of her sleeve. The manner surprised me. It was like watching a princess who'd been forced to live in a pigsty. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said softly. I sat across from her, the old wood of the table between us. I hadn't shared this table with another soul in 10 years. The simple sound of her fork scraping against the plate was an echo from a life I thought was gone forever. "Where'd you come from, Maggie?" I asked. She stopped chewing and set her fork down. "A farm, near Cheyenne, Mr. Boone's place." She said the name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "He doesn't like kids much, just likes the work they do for free." I watched her hand. Her fingers were unconsciously rubbing a spot on the inside of her arm. Through a tear in her sleeve, I saw it. A patch of yellowing, ugly bruises. A hot, dark anger rose in my chest. "Did he hurt you?" My voice was flat, dangerous. She shrugged, as if it didn't matter, as if it was just part of life. He yells when he drinks, sometimes worse. She picked up her fork again, but didn't eat. The orphanage lady said I should be grateful for a roof, but I'd rather sleep in a ditch than go back. My jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. There was nothing in this world I hated more than a man who'd raise his hand to a child. "You're safe here," I said. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. She looked up, her old eyes studying me. "You don't even know me. Why would you say that?" Why indeed? Maybe because I'd failed to protect my own family. Maybe because the guilt was a cancer in my bones. Or maybe, just maybe, because this little girl looked at me like I was the only thing standing between her and the end of the world. I didn't answer her. Instead, I stood and pointed to the back porch. "Pump out there. Water's cold, but it'll get you clean. I'll leave some soap." She slipped out the door without another word. I watched her through the window, pumping the iron handle with a fierce determination, scrubbing her face and hands until her skin was raw and pink. When she came back in, she looked different, younger, but the shadows in her eyes were still there. "I can help," she said suddenly, her gaze darting around the cabin. "I can sweep. I can wash dishes. I know how to work." "You don't have to do that," I said. But she was already gathering the plates, moving with a quick, practiced efficiency that spoke of a long, hard life. It was clear that for her, working was a way of earning her keep, of feeling like less of a burden. I let her be. Later, I went out to check the cattle, leaving her alone in the cabin. When I came back an hour later, I stopped dead on the porch. It was clean. The dead leaves were swept away. My 2 weathered rocking chairs had been moved, angled to face the weak afternoon sun. Ranger was lying at her feet, his tail thumping a lazy rhythm against the boards as she scratched behind his ears. "He likes me," she said, with a shy little smile. "He doesn't take to many people," I admitted. Ranger was as solitary as I was. Her smile faded. The fear crept back into her eyes. "You think she'll come soon? The lady?" "Probably," I said. I wasn't one for sugarcoating. "She'll have questions." Maggie looked down at her threadbare dress, then back at me. Her voice was a whisper. Do you think you can still pretend, like I asked, just for today?" Saying no felt like it would break her, and maybe me too. "One day," I said again. "But if she doesn't buy it, we can't lie forever. We'll have to figure something else out." "I understand," she whispered. "One day is more than I had yesterday." As the sun began to sink, we sat down for a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The silence between us was different now. Not empty, just new. I watched her, how she sat up so straight, how she took so little food, even though I could see the hunger still swimming in her eyes. "Did your mama teach you those manners?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "She did," she said softly, "before she got sick. My papa died the year before that, a railroad accident." I just nodded. I remembered that winter. Sickness had swept through Cheyenne like a wildfire, leaving fresh graves on every hill. After supper, I lit a lamp while she washed the dishes. I found her a moment later, standing by the fireplace mantel. Her small fingers were tracing the edge of an old photograph. It was my wedding picture, the last time I had truly smiled. She pulled her hand back, like she'd been burned when she saw me. "Sorry. You didn't do anything wrong." But seeing her there, so small and alone in my house of ghosts, twisted something deep inside me. She looked over at me, and as she moved, her tattered dress shifted, and something heavy fell out. It hit the wooden floor with a solid metallic thud. Not the jingle of a few coins. It was a heavy, dense sound. We both froze. Down on the floor, half hidden in the shadows, was a small but thick leather pouch, tied shut with a leather thong. It hadn't come from me. It had come from her. Maggie's face went white as a sheet. Her eyes were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with Mr. Boone or an orphanage. It was the terror of a secret being discovered. Before I could even ask, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the night. A lone rider, coming up the trail from town. Maggie's head snapped toward the window, pure panic on her face. "Is it her?" she whispered, her eyes pleading with me. "Could be," I said, moving to the door. The pouch lay on the floor between us, a silent, heavy question. My heart pounded in my chest. What had I just let into my home? This wasn't just a runaway girl. The rider's silhouette grew sharper against the dying sunset. A woman, posture as sharp as a blade. It was Clara Renner. Maggie scrambled to snatch the pouch off the floor, hiding it behind her back. "What do we do?" she breathed, her voice shaking. I looked from the pouch she was hiding to the terror on her face, and then toward the door where our visitor was about to knock. My simple, quiet life was over. I had agreed to one day of pretending. But I was starting to realize this was no game, and the stakes were higher than I could ever have imagined. The knock on the door wasn't timid. It was firm, measured, and full of authority. I put my hand on the latch, my jaw set. Behind me, I could hear Maggie's ragged breathing. She wasn't crying. She was preparing for a fight. I swung the door open. Clara Renner sat on her horse like a queen on a throne. She dismounted with a fluid, practiced motion, the trail dust clinging to her dark coat. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and they missed nothing. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice smooth but with an edge of steel. "I am Clara Renner from the Cheyenne Orphanage. I believe you have a child here. Maggie Ray." I didn't move from the doorway. "She's here. She's safe." Clara's gaze flicked past me, landing on Maggie. For a fraction of a second, her stern expression softened. "Maggie, you've caused quite a stir." Maggie straightened her small shoulders. "I'm not going back." Her voice trembled, but it was strong. Clara raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That is not your decision to make. May I come in?" My gut screamed no, but refusing would be an admission of guilt, and right now I didn't even know what I was guilty of. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. She swept into the cabin, her eyes cataloging everything: the clean floor, the plates in the drying rack, the scent of wood smoke. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. "You live alone, Mr. Cole?" It wasn't a question. "I do." "And how long has Maggie been in your care?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. I had to be careful. "A while," I said vaguely. Clara's sharp eyes snapped back to Maggie. "Is that true?" "Yes, ma'am," Maggie piped up, stepping a little closer to my side. "I've been helping. I feed the chickens, and sweep, and Ranger likes me." She pointed to the old hound, who actually thumped his tail against the floorboards right on cue. Clara was not impressed. "Do you have any legal claim to this child, Mr. Cole?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But she's not going back to Boone's farm." Clara's eyes narrowed. "So you know about Elias Boone?" "I know enough," I said, my voice flat. She let out a long, weary sigh, as if dealing with amateurs like me was a heavy burden. "Mr. Boone filed a report this morning in Cheyenne. He claims Maggie ran away. He also claims she stole a significant amount of money from his desk. He says she owes him for her keep." Maggie's face drained of all color. "I didn't steal anything that wasn't mine," she cried, but her voice cracked. Her hand, hidden behind her back, tightened on the pouch. I stepped forward, putting myself between Maggie and the woman. "If there's money, it will be returned, but the child will not be returned to a man who beats her." Clara studied me, her head tilted. "You seem very certain about that, Mr. Cole, for a man who's only known her a while. Why the sudden investment?" "Because I know what a home is supposed to be," I said, my eyes locking with hers, "and his farm ain't it." I felt Maggie press against my leg, a silent plea for protection. Clara saw it. Her expression softened again, just for a moment. "If I am to even consider leaving her here, I need proof this is a suitable environment. Where does she sleep?" I hesitated. The room. Anna's room. The room I hadn't set foot in for years, but Maggie, quick as a flash, grabbed Clara's hand. "This way," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She led the woman down the short hall to the little room at the end. The room I'd prepared that morning, making the bed, putting a cup of water by the window. Clara inspected it like a general inspecting his troops. She noted the folded quilt, the few pathetic belongings Maggie had arranged on the small dresser. It wasn't much, but it looked lived in. It looked intentional. "Did you make this bed yourself?" Clara asked her. "Yes, ma'am," Maggie said, standing tall. "Mr. Cole said I could have this room." When they returned to the main room, Clara's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes were full of questions. "I will have to speak with Mr. Boone. I will have to investigate his claims. For now, Maggie can remain here, under your supervision." She fixed me with a hard stare. "But understand this, Mr. Cole. This is a temporary arrangement. I will be back in 3 days. Consider it an evaluation. If I find any reason to believe this is unsafe or that you are being untruthful, I will remove her myself, and there will be consequences." "She's safe here," I said again, the words feeling more like a vow than a statement. Clara pulled on her gloves. "We'll see. Be good, Maggie. If you want this to work, you need to convince me you belong here." "I do belong here," Maggie said, her chin lifted high. Clara gave a curt nod and swept out the door. I followed her onto the porch and watched her mount her horse. "Mr. Cole," she said, pausing to look down at me. "This is not a game. A child's life is at stake." "I know that," I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. "We'll see if you do," she said, before turning her horse and riding off into the twilight. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maggie was standing in the middle of the room, her small hands balled into fists. The hidden pouch was now tucked into the waistband of her dress. "She doesn't believe us," Maggie whispered. "Not yet," I said. "But we've got 3 days to make her." "How?" I looked around my empty, silent cabin, the bare shelves, the cold hearth. "We start by making this place look less like a tomb and more like a home." A spark of fierce determination lit up her tired eyes. "I can do that," she said. "I'll make it the best home she's ever seen." But as I watched her, I knew it wasn't just about cleaning floors and arranging flowers. It was about the secret she was carrying, the heavy leather pouch. Whatever was in it, it was the reason Boone was furious, and it was the reason Clara was suspicious. This wasn't about a runaway orphan anymore. It was about whatever she stole, or whatever she was trying to protect. And I was standing right in the middle of it. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the old house. For the first time in years, they weren't just the groans of wood and wind. They were the soft footsteps of a little girl quietly moving through the rooms, trying to build a fortress of belonging around us both. But I knew. 3 days wasn't a reprieve, it was a deadline, and trouble was coming for us. The next day, a storm rolled in, hammering the roof with a cold, relentless rain. The world outside the cabin turned into a gray, blurry mess. I was up before dawn, but for the first time, I wasn't the only one. Maggie was already in the kitchen, her hair braided back, wearing an old shirt of mine that swallowed her whole. "Morning," she said, her voice small but determined. "I can help. You don't have to do everything." "You've barely been here a day and a half," I grumbled, flipping eggs in the skillet. "You should be resting." "I don't like waiting," she said firmly. "Waiting is when bad things happen." There was a wisdom in those words that a child shouldn't possess. I just nodded and slid a plate in front of her. The moment she was done eating, she pulled on an old coat and followed me out to the barn. The rain was coming down in sheets. I expected her to huddle by the door, but she walked straight to the stall of my most temperamental mare, Dusty. The horse was restless, kicking at the stall door. Maggie didn't flinch. She just reached through the bars and started talking to the horse, her voice a low, soothing hum. And the strangest thing happened. Dusty calmed down. The wild look in her eyes softened. "She likes you," I said, unable to hide my surprise. Maggie gave a small, sad smile. "I used to talk to the horses at Boone's farm. They were the only ones who listened." That little sentence hit me right in the gut. I handed her a brush. You can groom her. Just watch her hooves. While she worked, I tried to mend a broken harness, but my mind wasn't on the leather. It was on the girl and the secrets she was keeping. Later, as we stacked firewood by the hearth, she suddenly looked up at me, her face serious. If I'm going to belong here, it has to feel real, for both of us, she said. Right now, this place, it feels like it's just waiting for someone to leave again. She was right. This cabin wasn't a home. It was a shrine to a memory, a place frozen in time. And this little girl, this stranger, saw it in less than 2 days. Maybe you're right, I admitted, the words feeling strange in my mouth. That evening, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. Maggie sat by the fire, reading from a tattered book she'd found, while I cleaned my rifle. It was a comfortable silence, but my gut was churning. This was a lie, a temporary truce, and it was about to be broken. I knew it. You don't have to be so careful around me, I said suddenly. This isn't Boone's house. She flinched, just for a second. I don't know how to be any other way, she whispered to the pages of her book. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold, damp air a welcome shock. I needed to think. What was in that pouch? Why was Boone so desperate to get it back that he'd file a report? It couldn't just be a few stolen dollars. And Clara Renner, her questions were too pointed. She wasn't just checking on a runaway. She was hunting for something. When I came back inside, Maggie had fallen asleep on the rug in front of the fire, with Ranger curled up beside her like a furry, loyal guardian. I lifted her gently. She was so light she felt like a bundle of sticks. I carried her to the little room, the yellow room, and tucked her into bed. As I stood there, watching her sleep, my eyes fell on the old wooden cradle in the corner, the one Anna and I had built together. For 10 years, looking at it had been like a knife in my heart. But tonight, with Maggie breathing softly in the next bed, it didn't just feel like a monument to what I'd lost. It felt like a promise of what I had to protect. The next morning, the sky was still a heavy, bruised gray. I knew I had to go to town. I needed supplies, but more than that, I needed information. I needed to know what people were saying about Boone, about a runaway girl. As I saddled my horse, Maggie came out onto the porch. The fear was back in her eyes. Are you going to tell people about me? No, I said, tightening the cinch. Not yet. We stay quiet until Clara comes back. What if Boone finds out I'm here? I stopped what I was doing and looked her straight in the eye. He won't, and if he does, he'll have to go through me first. A tiny, fleeting smile touched her lips. I meant it, every word. I rode into Cheyenne with a storm brewing inside me that matched the one in the sky. At the general store, while I was buying flour and coffee, I overheard 2 ranch hands talking by the counter. Heard Elias Boone is fit to be tied, one of them said in a low voice. Says that little orphan girl he had ran off with his savings. His savings? The other one chuckled. Boone ain't saved $1 in his life, drinks it all away. But he's raising hell all over town, blaming everyone. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about a few dollars. This was something bigger. As I rode back to the ranch, I felt a new sense of urgency. When I crested the last hill, I saw her. Maggie was sitting on the porch steps, Ranger by her side, watching the road, waiting for me. When she saw me, she jumped up and waved, a real, genuine smile spreading across her face. For the first time since Anna died, I felt what it was like to be welcomed home. But the feeling was poisoned by a single, terrifying thought. This wasn't my home to offer, and she wasn't my girl to protect. Not yet. We were living on borrowed time, in a borrowed home, with a borrowed story, and our time was about to run out. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she looked up at me. Do you think she'll believe us? That I belong here? We'll make her believe, I said, my voice more confident than I felt. But as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, I realized this girl wasn't just looking for a home. She was building one, right here in the ruins of my life, and I was becoming willing to fight for it. I just didn't know who the real enemy was. Was it Boone? Or was it the secret she was still hiding in that little leather pouch? The sound of horses came fast and hard, not the steady pace of a single rider like Clara, but the thunder of a posse. Rangers barking tore through the morning quiet, a sharp, frantic warning. I was checking the south fence when I heard it. I straightened up, my hand instinctively going to my hip. 3 riders, coming down the main road like they owned it. And in the lead, a thick, bull-necked man with a face as red as a sunrise. Elias Boone. Maggie was by the chicken coop gathering eggs. She heard the horses and froze, the basket dropping from her hands. The eggs shattered on the ground. Her face went slack with a terror so profound it made my own blood run cold. "It's him," she breathed. "Go inside," I said, my voice a low command. "Now." She hesitated, her eyes locked on the approaching riders. "Will he—" "Inside, Maggie!" She finally turned and ran, disappearing into the cabin with Ranger scrambling after her. I walked forward to meet them, my boots leaving deep prints in the damp earth. I felt calm, a cold, dangerous calm. Boone reined his horse in so hard it reared up, spraying mud. He glared down at me, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. "Cole," he snarled, "I hear you got something that belongs to me." "I don't have anything of yours, Boone." "The hell you don't!" His voice was a whip crack. "That girl, Maggie, she ran off 3 nights ago, took my money with her. You're hiding a thief and I want her back." "You mean the girl with the bruises on her arms?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The one you treated like a slave? She's not going anywhere with you." Boone leaned forward in his saddle, his face getting redder. "She is my legal ward. The orphanage placed her with me. I got papers. You can't just take a person like you'd take a stray calf." "She's not a calf," I snapped. "And if your papers give you the right to beat a child, then they ain't worth the paper they're printed on." One of the men with him, a deputy named Larkin with a tired face, shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Cole, if the girl is his legal ward and she took his property, she didn't take any property." I cut him off. But even as I said it, I pictured the heavy pouch. What was I even defending? "She stays here." Boone spat a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt. "You think you can just say that? You're a broken-down fool living in a ghost house. You don't know the first thing about raising a child." "Maybe not," I said, my voice dropping even lower. "But I know how to keep one safe, which is more than you ever learned." Boone's hand twitched, moving toward the pistol on his own hip. The air between us went tight, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. "All right, that's enough," Larkin said, moving his horse between us. "No one's drawing guns. We'll let Judge Hammond in Cheyenne sort this out." Boone sneered. "Fine. The judge. I'll have his word on it by tomorrow. And when I come back, Cole, you better have her ready, or I'll see to it you lose a lot more than just some runaway brat." He looked past me, at the cabin, at the window where I knew Maggie was watching, and then he said the words that changed everything. "You're just as soft as your old partner, Walker," he spat. "Always trying to be a hero, and look where it got him." The world stopped. Walker, James Walker, my old ranching partner, my best friend, the man who had died in a supposed railroad accident 7 years ago. The same year his wife died of sickness. The same year their little girl, Maggie, disappeared into the orphanage system. It all clicked into place, the puzzle pieces snapping together with horrifying speed. Maggie Ray, Maggie Walker. This wasn't just some random orphan. This was Jimmy's daughter. Boone saw the look on my face. He knew he'd made a mistake. He yanked on his reins, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "This ain't over," he snarled, before kicking his horse and tearing off down the road, his men scrambling to follow. I just stood there, the world tilting on its axis. When I finally turned and walked back to the cabin, my legs felt like lead. Maggie was standing just inside the door, her face pale. "He's gone?" she whispered. "For now." I knelt down in front of her, my hands on her small shoulders. My voice was hoarse. "Maggie, your father, his name was James Walker, wasn't it?" Tears instantly welled in her eyes. She nodded, a single heartbreaking movement. He didn't die in a railroad accident, did he? She shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. Boone did it. He came to the farm one night. He said Papa owed him money. They fought. And then Papa was gone. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a beating. It was murder. And the pouch, the heavy leather pouch. It was suddenly so clear. The money, I whispered. The pouch you have, that was your father's. She nodded again, pulling the pouch from her dress. Her small hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't just gold coins. It was a thick stack of bills, a deed to a piece of land, and a small, folded letter. She handed it to me. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The writing was Jimmy's. Ethan, if you're reading this, then Clayton's people got to me. Boone is one of them. The money is for Maggie. The deed is for the north pasture we always talked about. Don't let them have it. Don't let them have her. Protect my girl. J.W. Clayton, Marcus Clayton, the ruthless land baron who had tried to force us both out years ago. The man whose accidents were always fatal for his rivals. The man who I always suspected had something to do with the fire that took my Anna and our baby. It wasn't sickness. It was an arson. It was murder. This whole time I'd been mourning an illness. I'd been a fool. I had been hiding from a ghost when I should have been hunting a monster. I looked at Maggie, at Jimmy Walker's daughter. This wasn't about pretending anymore. This wasn't about an orphan. This was about a promise I never knew I had to keep. He's going to come back, Maggie whispered, her eyes wide with terror. He'll tell the judge I'm a thief. He can try, I said, my voice a low growl. I stood up, the letter clutched in my hand. Let him. Let Clara Renner come back. Let the judge come. Let them all come. I looked at this little girl, this last living piece of my best friend, and I felt a rage so pure and so cold it burned away all the grief and all the fear. Boone wasn't just coming back for a runaway girl. He was coming back to finish a job. But he wasn't going to find a broken-down rancher waiting for him. He was going to find a man with nothing left to lose, and a ghost of his own to avenge. The next morning the wind was back, sharp and cold, like it was trying to warn us. I expected Maggie to be up, but the cabin was silent. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over me. I walked to the yellow room and found her curled under the quilt, her body trembling. I touched her forehead. She was burning up. Papa, she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. I don't feel good. The word Papa hit me like a physical blow, but there was no time for that now. All I could see was Anna, her face flushed with fever, her breath growing shallow. The memory was a ghost that had haunted me for 10 years. Don't you worry, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. You're going to be fine. I worked with a frantic energy, fetching cool water, brewing a bitter tea from herbs my mother had taught me to use. My hands, usually so steady, trembled as I worked. Ranger whined at my feet, sensing the panic rolling off me in waves. Maggie was too weak to even sit up. I had to hold the cup to her lips. Will you stay? She asked, her eyes glassy with fever. I'll stay, I promised, pulling a chair to her bedside. For hours I sat there in the dim light of the cabin, the storm raging outside, and a different kind of storm raging within me. I wiped her brow. I whispered stories I didn't even know I remembered, and with every shallow breath she took, the ghosts of my wife and child stood in the corner of the room, watching me, waiting for me to fail again. By late afternoon, the fever was worse. Her skin was scorching hot, her breathing ragged. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me by the throat. I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't lose her, too. Ranger, stay with her, I commanded the dog, who was already lying faithfully by her bed. I saddled my horse with a speed I didn't know I possessed and rode out into the dying light, pushing the animal harder than I ever had before. The ride to Cheyenne was a blur of wind, rain, and sheer terror. I burst into the town and headed straight for the doctor's office. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that saw right through you, was just locking up. Cole? What on earth? I need you, I gasped, out of breath. It's a girl, a fever. It's bad. Her professional calm took over. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. Lead the way. We rode back through the storm, two desperate figures against a blackening sky. The moment we got to the cabin, Dr. Harper was all business. She checked Maggie's pulse, listened to her breathing, her movements efficient and sure. She's weak, Dr. Harper said, her voice serious. Exhaustion, malnutrition, it's made her vulnerable. The fever is high, but we can fight it. She's a strong girl. I hovered by the door, feeling useless. Is she going to... I couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Harper looked me dead in the eye. She has a fighting chance, Ethan. But she's been through more than any child should. That takes a toll on the body and the soul. All through that long, dark night, I didn't leave her side. I read to her from an old book of Anna's, my voice a low rumble in the quiet room. When she whimpered in her sleep, I was there with a cool cloth. You're safe, I whispered over and over. I've got you. Around midnight, her eyes fluttered open. They were clearer. You're still here, she murmured. Of course I am. I thought maybe you'd send me back while I was sick, to the orphanage. A raw, fierce protectiveness surged through me. Never, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I would burn this whole territory to the ground before I let Boone or anyone else lay a hand on you again. A tiny, faint smile touched her lips. That doesn't sound very lawful, Papa. I managed a small, choked laugh. Maybe not, but it's the truth. By dawn, the fever finally broke. Her breathing evened out, and the color began to return to her cheeks. Dr. Harper left soon after, leaving me with strict instructions. She's tougher than she looks, the doctor said as she mounted her horse. Then she looked at me. So are you. For the next day, I didn't leave her. I brought her broth and told her stories. I saw the light slowly returning to her eyes. Will Clara come soon? She asked that evening, her voice stronger. Soon, I said. And the judge too. But you rest. We'll face them when you're strong. She nodded, sinking back into the pillows. I like it here, she said quietly, even if it's all just pretend. I froze. It's not pretend anymore, Maggie, I said softly. Not to me. Her eyes widened, and a fragile understanding passed between us. She reached out her small hand, and without hesitation, I took it. Her fingers were warm in my calloused palm, a connection, a promise. That night, as she slept soundly, I sat on the porch, staring out at the star-dusted sky. The letter from Jimmy was folded safely in my pocket. Clayton, Boone. It was all connected. My family's death, his death, Maggie's suffering. It was all one big, ugly knot. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't just about guardianship anymore. Clara Renaer's visit wasn't just an evaluation, it was a countdown. Boone wasn't going to wait for a judge. He was going to come back for that deed and that money. He was going to come back to silence the last witness to his crime. But I was ready. I stood in the doorway, watching Maggie sleep. This wasn't just about protecting a lost child. This was about defending the only family I had left. This was about vengeance. The morning air was crisp and clear, the kind of morning that makes you think things might be okay. But I knew better. I saw them coming from a mile off. 2 riders. Clara Renner, and beside her, a heavy-set man I recognized instantly. Judge Hammond. My gut tightened. I had expected Clara. I had not expected the judge himself to ride all the way out here. This was it. Maggie, still pale but on her feet, stood beside me on the porch. Is it them? It is, I said, my voice gentle. You stay inside. Let me handle this. She retreated into the shadows of the doorway, her small face pressed against the glass. I stepped out to meet them, my feet planted firmly on the porch I'd built with my own 2 hands. Clara dismounted, her sharp eyes taking in everything. The clean porch, the smoke curling from the chimney, the quiet strength in my posture. She knew something had changed. Mr. Cole, we've come to assess Maggie's placement. Judge Hammond tipped his hat. Morning, Cole. Mr. Boone has made some very serious claims. He's filed for immediate custody. Says the girl is a thief and a runaway. I thought I'd hear your side of it before this ends up in a formal courtroom. My jaw clenched. You'll get my side, I said. Come on in. They followed me into the cabin. Maggie stood by the table, small and silent, but her chin was high. The judge's gaze swept the room, noting the flowers in a jar, the tidiness. He looked surprised. You've been looking after her? The judge asked. I have, I said. She belongs here. Clara's eyebrow shot up. That's a bold statement, Mr. Cole. The last time I was here, you were only pretending for a day. Things change, I said, my voice low and dangerous. They changed when I found out Boone was the one putting bruises on her. They changed when I found out he's been lying about everything. The judge looked serious. He says she stole a great deal of money from him. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the mantel, took down the leather pouch, and placed it on the table. This is what he's after. It belonged to her father, James Walker, my old partner. Clara and the judge both looked stunned. James Walker? The judge breathed. I was told he died in a train accident. That's the story Boone told everyone, I said, my voice turning to steel. I pulled the folded letter from my pocket and handed it to the judge. This is the truth, written by Walker himself before Boone murdered him. The judge's face went grim as he read the letter. Clara Renner took a step back, her professional facade cracking for the first time. She looked at Maggie with new eyes, full of shock and dawning horror. My God, the judge whispered, looking from the letter to me. He names Marcus Clayton. He does, I confirmed. Boone is one of Clayton's thugs. He killed Walker for his land and his money, and I have a strong suspicion he's the one who set the fire that killed my wife and child 10 years ago, when I refused to sell this ranch to Clayton. The cabin was dead silent. The weight of 10 years of lies and murder settled in the air between us. Maggie moved to my side, her small hand finding mine. And then we heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats. More than one. More than three. An army. Boone, I said, my voice flat. I moved to the window. It was him, all right. And he had at least 5 other men with him, all armed. He hadn't come for a hearing. He'd come for a war. The door burst open, and Boone stormed in, his face a mask of fury. This is over, Cole. The judge is here. You're going to hand her over. He stopped dead when he saw the letter in the judge's hand and the pouch on the table. His eyes went wide with panic. Elias Boone, the judge said, his voice ringing with authority. You are under arrest for the murder of James Walker. Boone just laughed, a crazy, desperate sound. Arrest me? You and what army, Judge? He drew his pistol. Clayton runs this territory, not you. Now give me the girl and the pouch, and maybe I'll let you all walk out of here. But something was wrong. Clara Renner wasn't moving. She wasn't siding with the judge. A slow, cold smile was spreading across her face. He's right, Judge, she said, her voice smooth as silk. She pulled a small Derringer pistol from her handbag. Mr. Clayton sends his regards. He wants the deed, and he wants no witnesses. My blood ran cold. She was one of them. She was never from the orphanage. The whole thing, the evaluation, the concern. It was all an act, a way to get inside my home, to find out if Maggie had the evidence. You, I snarled at her. Me, she said with a shrug. A girl's got to make a living, and Mr. Clayton pays very, very well. It was a trap. They were all in on it. They had us cornered. Judge Hammond stood there, stunned and unarmed. Maggie pressed against me, trembling, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had cornered me in my own home, on my own land, the land I knew like the back of my hand, the land I was willing to die for. You want her? I said, pushing Maggie behind me. You want this deed? You'll have to come and get it. And in one swift motion, I kicked the heavy kitchen table over, sending plates in the pouch scattering. I grabbed the rifle I always kept by the hearth, and I fired. Not at them. At the oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. It exploded, plunging the room into smoke and chaos. Maggie, run! I yelled. To the cellar! In the confusion, I shoved her toward the hidden trap door under the rug. Boone and his men started firing wildly into the smoke-filled room. I returned fire, using the overturned table as cover. The roar of the guns was deafening in the small cabin. I heard the cellar door slam shut just as a bullet splintered the wood next to my head. I had to give her time. I scrambled toward the back of the cabin, kicking open the door to the porch and diving out into the cold morning air. They came pouring out after me, their faces grim. Boone, Clara, the hired guns. "He's heading for the barn!" Boone yelled. It was exactly what I wanted them to think. I didn't run for the barn. I circled around, low to the ground, using the terrain I knew so well. I was no longer a rancher. I was a hunter, and they were on my hunting ground. One by one, I picked them off. Not to kill, to wound. A shot to a leg here, a shoulder there. I used the rocks, the trees, the ditch by the fence line. They were clumsy, loud city killers out of their element. I was a ghost on my own land. Soon it was just Boone and Clara left, huddled behind the water trough, firing blindly into the trees. "Come out and face us, Cole!" Boone screamed, his voice laced with panic. I didn't answer. I just kept moving, circling closer. Finally, I was right behind them. "It's over, Boone," I said, my voice low and cold. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He tried to raise his pistol, but I was faster. The butt of my rifle connected with his jaw, and he went down hard. Clara Renner screamed and tried to run, but I tackled her, sending her tumbling into the mud. Her fancy pistol went skittering away. Just then, Judge Hammond emerged from the smoke-filled cabin, coughing but unharmed. He took in the scene, the wounded men groaning on the ground, Boone unconscious, and Clara pinned beneath me. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a newfound respect. I got to my feet, my rifle still trained on Clara. "The law has finally come to Wyoming, Judge," I said, my voice ragged. "It's time you did your job." When it was all over, when the deputy and his men had rounded up Boone and his crew, including the treacherous Clara Renner, a strange quiet fell over the ranch. The judge stood on my porch, holding the deed and Walker's letter. "This is enough," he said, his voice heavy. "This is enough to put Clayton away for good. You have my word, Cole. Justice will be done." He looked over at the cellar door, which was slowly creaking open. "You're a good man, Ethan Cole. You did what the law couldn't." Maggie emerged, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes wide. She ran to me, her small arms wrapping around my waist, holding on for dear life. I held her close, the fierce protective love I felt for her washing away the last of the cold rage. "It's over, Papa," she whispered into my shirt. I looked out over my land, my home. It wasn't a place of ghosts anymore. It was a place of new beginnings. I stroked her hair, my throat tight with emotion. "It's over, Maggie," I said, my voice thick. "You're home now, for good." We stood there for a long time, just holding on to each other as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The wind had died down, the air was still. For the first time in 10 years, my ranch felt truly peaceful. I wasn't just Ethan Cole, the lonely rancher anymore. I was a father, and I had my daughter back. Not the one I lost, but the one I found. And that was more than enough. If you believe that family is more than blood and that justice is worth fighting for, then hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming.